Good afternoon, everyone. You know, uh, I have a very special person and a special company that he leads sitting next to me on my right, Venkat. You know, look at Trent. I was trying to see the market cap today, almost 1.5 lakh crore. Share price was, please, it's a rare company, please give them applause. Share price around 4,500 rupees. And they've added almost like $6.5 billion to market cap in the last 6 months. How many companies are in India? They have a $6.5 billion market cap. This is the delta. This is the addition to the market cap. And you know, the big companies are like 2 billion, etc. They've added like 3 times a big company in the last 6 months. That's the kind of market cap. It's very, very inspirational. In my 32 years in this industry, very rarely I see a company in our industry performing that well. And I'm going to start with 1 or 2 questions from the audience, not to Venkat, but to gauge your interest, what kind of question you want to ask Venkat, who runs this phenomenal organization called Trent with a 1.5 crore market cap. So I'm going to come to you, but I'll start with a couple of anecdotes related to Venkat's company. One is, there's an industrialist friend of mine in Bangalore, invested in Trent at 900 rupees. So he recently called me less than a month back. He says, now the share price is at 4,000 rupees. Should I sell? You are in the industry, so tell me. I said, they're growing at 50%. You know, look at last 2 quarters. Trend has grown NSV at 50% plus and EBITDA also at 50% plus on a scale which is more than 10,000 crores, right? So on that scale, somebody's growing at 50%. I said, you'll be mad, my friend, to sell a company which is growing at 50% in these market conditions. Then he said, but my share price is at 900, might come down. So he said, should I sell half? I said, don't sell half, you're my friend, sell less. And now, you know, that discussion was about 4,000 rupees. Now the share price today is at 4,500 rupees. I messaged my friend saying, boss, you sold 1/3 at such a low price, you could have waited and sold that. You know, that's one story I want to tell. Second story I want to tell, recently I was in BKC and a friend of mine was saying that I'll acquire something in your industry at 30,000 crores and take it to 1 lakh crore. And I said, 1 lakh crore? There are how many companies in our industry you're talking about, you know, at 1 lakh crore? But there is a trend. Now, what has happened, Venkat, is that because of the trend, it's given a hope to the people. Like this industry also can have, you can think of buying a 30,000 crore company and hoping to, you know, like Trent, take it to 1 lakh crore. Not easy, not going to happen. You know, it's a rare success that we are fortunate to have Venkat to share his story with us. Anybody wants to give me 1 or 2 questions, that the kind of question you want to ask? Venkat is not going to answer those questions. For me to gauge your interest so that I can guide this conversation towards the interests of the audience here. Anybody? Can you give the mic to somebody? Yeah, I can see a hand there. Can you tell me what kind of question you want to ask Venkat?
Yeah, hi. I would love to hear the success recipe of Zudio. I mean, that's something of great interest.
That's going to be my first question. Anything else? One more question. I see Palki here. Yeah, Palki.
What was the mistake you were making for the past 5 years, which you found and corrected?
Okay, we'll also ask him about some challenges and everything. I get a sense, one more question at the back. Last question, then I'll start with the fire chat.
How much of the success of Trent is due to franchising? So, because I think they do a lot of franchising, so if you can get that angle in.
Thank you. So let's start, Venkat. Tell us like he said, recipe, the reason of success, some key themes that you and your companies are working on. Over to you, Venkat.
Shailesh, first of all, I think that's much of what you said was gross exaggeration. So I start with the complaint. That said, thank you very much. That's being very kind. In many ways, you can't make a baby in 2 months. Trent is not something that's been cooked up in the last 2 years. And in many ways, I would argue that there's huge amounts of opportunity. Nagesh, sitting there, you know, talked about opportunity in India. I just couldn't agree with you more, Nagesh, that there is clearly opportunity. But the issue for us as businessmen to think about is how many of us are being comfortable that it takes time to build some of these outcomes that we seek to chase. And Shailesh, the reality is being slower is somehow gotten a bad name. And I think it's an opportunity for us thinking about it to say, how can we really set up for the medium and the long term, make choices which deliver big outcomes? If you have been exercising for the last 10 years, and I look at you and say, oh my God, this fellow looks fabulous, and I'm going to compete by exercising 7 hours a day for the next 2 weeks, I'm just not going to be able to do anything to match up with you. And in many cases, I think a case like Tanishq, Ajay was here a few minutes back, the reality is it was built over 25 years. And you talked about 100,000 crore market cap. We still get told internally, oh my God, look at Tanishq, look at Titan.
4 lakh.
And yeah, we're still way off the mark. So the reality is there is so much to look forward to in India, but I would argue that a lot of the outcomes in the consumer spaces are about sticking to choices which we have conviction about for long periods of time and executing consistently.
So Venkat, one thing I pick up from what you're saying is a patient approach. It's a long-term, and I see like you're doing Samo and or a Tanera in the Tanishq side, that Tata Group, those two companies, that you take up a project called Samo and you're doing a trial. Zudio was one such, we saw a little bit of trial and then it's scaling up, or in some other group. So one thing for the audience I can say is that you're saying a patient, focused approach versus trying to do something like a short-term high energies. But can you also tell us some more theme? Because see, you can't build a 1.5 lakh crore company through just patient, right? And that's not just one theme. I'm sure we want to hear some more double-clicking. Can you tell us 3 themes that are working in favor of Trent?
So good shouts. And I think it's not, you're good at pushing me back. Take, for instance, this business about being completely own branded. We don't sell any third party. India is a big enough market for all kinds of models. So it's not to say that the playbook that we use in Trent is the only playbook for success in the spaces that we play, but it is a playbook that works for us. And being completely own branded is so integral to so many choices that we make. We just do not sell any third party brands in our business. And that kind of willingness to, again, if you go back to the point that I was making, it's slower. If you don't have brands in your stores, or whether it's online or in physical stores, at the end of the day, it means you're going to get a slower flywheel to turn, at least in the initial years. Or for the matter, let me take one more thing which probably some in the audience probably don't necessarily appreciate outside in. We don't distribute. We used to be culturally a retail company. At some point, my predecessor said, no, why retail? We should be a branded business. So we are a brand business which has a lot of retail presence. And we are increasingly a distribution business which has reach, which is leveraging the outcomes that we have from the brands. So we totally control every bit of distribution. We're totally direct to consumer. Or for that matter, a third choice. When is the last time any of us saw that we advertise? We don't do anything above the line. So the commitment is that we will turn around and build something organic. Now, there are about 20, 25 of these choices, which are material choices. And one of you in the audience mentioned, what are the mistakes that you have made? Oh, there are too many to count. That's the reality. And what works is what you double down on, and what doesn't work, as long as you have control over the chain, hopefully we turn around and eliminate.
So Venkat, again, I'm doing a summary of few themes that emerging. One is patiently building a business long term. You said focusing on own brands. You said no distribution, direct to consumer, own retail. You also mentioned that we don't advertise above the line and sort of create this. Any other theme that, Venkat, I can push you into, like sort of double clicking? Because I've also done some channel checks and I'm going to do it after that. So over to you first.
No, Shailesh, I can go on. For instance, take inventory disciplines. We are very, very clear that we're not going to be on sale for 10 months of the year. Now, it's a huge problem because then you can't intervene with what you put out for the customer on basis market conditions. You can't turn around and say, last week it rained a lot and therefore I need to do something for a city. Now, there are different models. You can turn around and say, no, I'm going to customize extensively, or like what we do, we are saying, no, we won't customize. We won't customize the offer. Now, or take one more, which I will give you since you probe. The market's huge, the market's growing, and the market's clearly gone online in very significant respects in the spaces that we operate. But if you look at the choices that we make on online, in Westside, we are again purely direct to consumer. Even if we are listed on the Tata platforms, we are only listed on the Tata platforms and Fireside.com on the app. And we did last year about 2.3 million units on Fireside.com plus the Tata platforms. And we are entirely direct to consumer. In the sense, actual transaction is between the Trent and the end customer, and it's never an intermediary. Or for that matter, take Zudio. Now, Fireside took this route. In Zudio, we said, listen, it's a great opportunity being online, but with Zudio, it adds so much complexity, we will not be online. In fact, Zudio, Shailesh, used to be online in 2019. We pulled it off. I'm very thankful to all my senior colleagues who decided it's a great idea to pull it off. And it just reduces complexity enormously. Now, it's a choice. Now, it is not to say this is the right choice for every brand, but it is a choice that you make for a brand at a point in time. And if it is right, you double down on it.
I think, Venkat, you touched upon a very, very core problem that this whole audience and me and all of us suffer. It's the high discounting. If I have to say one enemy of the fashion, retail, or accessory-related business is discounting. And, our USAs have sort of got preponed where the weather pattern have got postponed. And today, very difficult to sell winter wear at full price because the winter, this recently peaked in India from mid-Jan till mid-Feb, where the USA started by 20th of December. So, discounting is a number one enemy of this industry. And what you just mentioned that, 10 months you don't discount. And you need courage to do something like that. And I was doing some channel checks and people told me, and Venkat, you can sort of give inputs from what I heard about your company, saying that they put a style code in the stores, and if it doesn't sell for 8 to 9 weeks and shows lower sell-through than what it should be, they pull back. They don't discount it. They pull back and keep it in the stock room, and when the USA starts, and they bring it back, it's true for Westside and Zudio, that's what I'm told. So I think, can you tell us there are learnings, Venkat, for the industry, how to reduce discounting?
Shailesh, I think there is a whole bunch of mistakes that you make as a business. As much as individuals, we make mistakes. The reality is being willing to acknowledge that it's an internal problem first, not an external problem, not a customer problem. And the answer to mistakes is not a reduction in price, is the ethos. And the answer to that is take your own poison, take it quickly, and then move on and correct it properly is a pitch. And it's worth thinking about why we shouldn't do that. And the other corollary to that statement is, why don't we simply write down on one sheet of a paper and say, what does our brand stand for? And then try to be really true to that pitch of saying, what do we stand for? If we do some of that, I would bet that we'll all be better off. And there'll be different models, Shailesh. And that's why I gave the contrast of Westside versus Zudio. We're very happy for Westside to have the convenience of being shopped online. At the same time, in Zudio, we do not want to give the convenience. Now, it's a choice. Now, can we be true to both those choices? And it's not about A choice and B choice being contradictory. Like in social sciences, Shailesh, like you very much would appreciate. Opposite of A can be B, and which can also be as right as A. So it's a question of choice. And two, it's a question of whether we can stick to the choice and not get too tempted by peer pressure.
In fact, I can ask you that. So what does, in a simple language for the industry, what does Westside stand for? What does Zudio stand for? Let's hear from you.
I think everything about Westside is being aspirational and yet at amazing prices and in a nice environment. That pretty much summarizes what Westside seeks to stand for. It needs to be aspirational fashion in a nice environment, delivered at amazing prices. And we will do that while it is completely own branded, completely direct to consumer, and something which customers continue to appreciate the consistency of what the brand delivers. So we will not be available on Myntra, period. That's not about Myntra not being good, Shailesh. It's about a brand choice that we are making. On the other hand, Zudio is everything about accessibility. We'll never have as many websites as we will have Zudios. Why shouldn't we be available at every other location which is relevant for shopping, for this kind of space, for the customer? In the case of Zudio, is a question mark that we answer internally. And we do think accessibility is a great opportunity in India. And if quick commerce is taken off, quick commerce is wanting to have it now. And in this kind of spaces that you and I operate in, why is it that if you're 10 minutes away from a store, why isn't it interesting enough for the customer?
You know, and what about Zudio? What does Zudio stand for?
Zudio stands for accessibility. I probably didn't phrase it well enough before I went on about accessibility, Shailesh. Zudio is all about accessibility. It's accessibility in terms of fashion, accessibility in terms of price, accessibility in terms of location.
You know, what I'm picking from Venkat, he's used the word complexity, say reduce complexity, and sort of simplicity is a theme that's saying keep the business simple, channel choices, pricing choices are coming about. You know, simplicity is a one theme. And I also sort of, again, did some check for this Fireside, and people said the use of fixtures in West Side, and it's very easy to shop. Accessibility of merchandise. People said in Zudio, you don't use too many colors. The color themes are very clear, etc. So for the benefit of the audience and all of us, just take us through a little more. How do you keep business simple? And I think one word you use is choices. I think when you are very clear about choices you make, then what leads to is simplicity. Somewhere you are saying, I picked up ease of doing, easy, simplicity, and choices you make. I think these two things I picked up while you were talking, Venkat. So can you tell us a little more about how do you keep business simple? How do you keep complexity less? How do you, make very decisive choices?
You know, you have the privilege of grilling me, Shailesh. I'm going to run around and reciprocate with kindness, in the later part of this Fireside. Take, for instance, RFID. We've gone 100% RFID for all practical purposes in our fashion businesses. Now, most businesses and consultants and people who advise want us to do the customer-facing aspects first. I have some of my senior colleagues here in this audience, and the instinct was internally, no, we'll flip it exactly the other way around. We'll do everything other than the customer-facing aspects first. Because it is going to take time to digest the complexity of changing processes to land outcomes that we are seeking to address, Shailesh. And the reality today is the tens of millions of garments and merchandise that we currently are able to handle would not be possible but for the fact that we are using technology. But the technology is not necessarily customer-facing technology, but it's delivering customer outcomes. Now, that kind of choices where you don't get brag rights are actually a very important aspect of saying how do we keep the business simple and fast and changing significantly. So if we can build that into culture, it makes a huge difference, Shailesh. So cultural anchoring of choices and disciplines are something which probably would help brands land customer outcomes much better.
I think I would urge everyone in this room that, what just Venkat said about culture. See, what happens is that the whole industry has a FOMO. Oh, if somebody's doing this, let us also do that. And they try to copy whether it's part of their DNA or not. And I think what Venkat is saying is that the rooting of things in the cultural context is very, very critical. And that's a big point and big learning for me, Venkat, we said. I'm going to move to some more simpler questions now. you don't do any investor call every quarter. And, of course, your results speak for themselves. You don't have to talk after that. When you're growing your top line last 2 quarters by 50% and the EBITDA by 50% in these current market condition. But just take us through why you don't have a quarterly investor call.
Shailesh, you manage so much more complexity than we do. We take very simple exam questions and turn around and hopefully get better marks. But look at the complexity that you're solving for. So whether it's US Polo, whether it's whether it's Tommy, whether it's all of the brands are such different outcomes that you need to land in such different markets. And the complexity that needs to be solved, therefore, is much greater in some of the businesses, Shailesh. In our business, things do not change in quarterly dollops, is the bet. And my feed to investors and analysts and this whole community is the less we talk and the more we do, the better the outcomes that we can hopefully seek to land, because the story doesn't change. So I'm not going to help you by answering why my inventory provisioning last quarter was worse or better, because it doesn't say anything about the future. It just says that we have a bunch of disciplines which we are following, and it'll show up in numbers, and it'll be a little more volatile than what you would expect otherwise.
I think what I'm picking up from Venkat here is that if your business is rooted in long-term thought process, then the quarterly investor calls lose a little bit of importance. And I don't want to say anything wrong about the quarterly investor call, but you're saying if it's a long-term process, then a quarter to quarter doesn't make much of difference.
It's linked to our business model, Shailesh. There are other businesses which are very relevant. So I'm not against investor calls. It's a choice that we're making. It's again a choice of saying we don't do it because we think our business model is relatively simple. Our business, if you look at it, it's 3-4 brands that account for 99% of our business. So, and most of the story is said in our annual report, annual general meetings, and we do have a few analyst interactions 3-4 times a year. So we hopefully do reasonable amount of justice, but I get a lot of complaints, and once in a while I get arm twisted by the Shaileshes of the world to do these fireside chats.
Perfect. And Jack Welch famously said that your chief HR officer should be the second highest paid person in the company, because the importance of HR. Here is Venkat, who used to be the CFO of the company, got promoted as CEO and then running a business which is growing at 50%, both top line and bottom line. So Venkat, you come from a background, a functional background, now leader for a good time, really performing well. So who is your number two? Like Jack Welch said, that your HR head should be the number 2, in your organization. Who is your number 2 now? As you have, transitioned from CFO responsibility to CEO responsibility, who is or who are your functions? Who are your number 2s?
Shailesh, I think we are only as good as our teams are, and a lot of times we get to enjoy the joy of being in the spotlight because the teams do a great job, and that's the reality of it. There are possibly about 10, 15, 20 senior people in the business who are all super important and make an enormous amounts of difference to the business, and that's why you get to see some of the right answers that land. And that said, we do make a lot of mistakes, Shailesh, and that's a reality. And I'm not even saying it as in passing. The reality is, if we don't make mistakes, I think we would not be moving the business as fast as we should be moving. So, are there key people in the business across the board in the leadership which make a huge amount of difference? I would say yes. And 2, I would bet there are a lot of young talent which is blossoming, which is also delivering outcomes. And for instance, Manish joined us from Tata International. He's taken over as the head of HR. So we've had a whole bunch of management changes in the last 3-4 years. Almost all of it organic. And many ways that's landed reasonably okay and has continued to deliver results while with all that change, because I think we do have a culture which accommodates a lot of diversity.
Last 2 questions from my side, then we'll throw it open to the audience to ask Venkat, a very rare chance to catch out of Venkat like this. So second last question from my side is that I see in Trent a lot of foreign talent who is actually your employee sitting in Bombay head office. I'm told there are design heads, who are foreign nationals. They come and sit dedicated resources, not consultant, but employees or whatever consultant sitting in your office. I just want to ask you that what the thought process and what are the learnings for the industry by having these dedicated full-time foreign talents who I'm told are seniors, and you can throw a little more light on that. And then I'll have my last question. Over to you, Venkat.
Shailesh, I think, for instance, we know this here, he's probably been with in as many years as I've been in Trent. And we do think yin and yang works. You want to be able to take youngsters who are in the business and let them blossom. And on the other side, every once in a while, adding a fresh throw of talent into the business in specific dollops, in specific areas, does deliver outcomes. But again, I think having a cultural wiring to get people horizontally and getting them to deliver value, not only to the business, but to themselves. Because if they don't enjoy doing what they do, we won't get outcomes. And that ethos is pretty much been set in the business for the last 20 years. And we're just continuing to leverage it, Shailesh. And do we therefore have expatriates working with us? Yes. But is it the only model of talent which delivers outcomes? I think it's not fair on the rest of the business, if I say so.
I wanted to double click on having foreign talent. I'm not saying that it takes away from the local talent, etc. I'm just saying very few companies get expats as full-time employees, senior level role, and sit. Often we use consultants, but what I saw a difference in Trent was having them as employee or as a full-time sitting in your office, dedicated role. That in that context, I asked.
Oh, I completely buy the argument, Shailesh, and it is not normal, and it's not even normal within the Tata ecosystem always. What's kind of worked is if they have an amazing track record and they're super passionate about an individual area, then I guess it's really worth having them as full-time participants in this game rather than part-time consultants.
Last question, and then we have another 8 minutes for audience to ask questions to Venkat. So last question is, what's the way forward for Trent, Venkat? What are the 2-3 things, themes that you get motivated with, or what are 1 or 2 things which make you not sleep at night sometime? So what's the way forward for Trent?
Shailesh, if we can one day become a platform like you are, like you are in Arvind. You run multiple brands with divergent ethos and positioning and still bring it all together to land customer outcomes. If we can add what we have plus become a portfolio of strong brands which deliver customer outcomes, which have substantially differentiated market positionings, then I think we have done a decent job of where we could be going from here. And I would say that the opportunity for us is how do we add more growth engines to the portfolio? Why not take the same playbook and deliver in proximate spaces, but deliver with different brands and not just be limited to delivering with A or B or C. So we're very excited about Star, for instance. Now, Nagesh spoke about Hypercity. I can put my hand up and say, Nagesh, that I have a lot of scars and cuts and bruises to count on the foot side as much. But that said, that doesn't take away from the customer opportunity at all in India. The reality is the customer opportunity exists. How can we do justice in a viable way which allows us to build a credible business for the long term is what we are chasing. So that's one part of the answer, Shailesh. The other part that you threw at the table was, what are the things that keep us awake at night? The reality is, for all of us, if we feel that we have done it, I think we are already dead. Complacence is the easiest way to dig your own grave. And in a kind of market that we are in, with the kind of opportunities that are being chased by almost everybody in the world, looking at India, the reality is we have not booked any sales next month yet. And every day is a new day. And if we don't chase being relevant and not being disrupted, I think we would be dead even before we start. So there is enough to be worried about in terms of what disruptions are coming our way. All I would nevertheless add a corollary to that statement, Shailesh, is just because it's disruption, it is not necessarily always apparent what the disruption is. Most people miss the fact that disruption may not be coming from directions that are taken for granted as the disruptors. So, enough and more to be worried about and be prepared for.
It's been wonderful talking to Venkat. There are hands being raised, and I'm going to start with Nagesh. But before that, I'm seeing a common themes what Venkat is saying: long-term approach, few brands being built with clear, views on what they stand for, simplification, reduction of complexity, making decisive choices, discounting, which we discussed earlier, online for some reason, or other channels, it's more direct to consumer, and less, channels in between, cost, speed, cultural routing. There are a lot of sort of learnings from Venkat here that led to, over a period of many decades, Trent becoming a 1.5 lakh crore company and growing at a 50% quarter on quarter on NSV as well as on EBITDA. So, Nagesh, you want to start? You raise your hand. So, please give the mic to Nagesh.
I already have the mic. So, now my question is to Venkat on a more personal level. A CFO Venkat versus a CEO Venkat. Okay, what are the changes that you had to go through in a personal, from an individual?
Nagesh, it's almost unfair that you're sitting on the other side of the table. But nevertheless, we're far more used to you being here on stage. Nevertheless, Nagesh, I guess most importantly, you become a people manager rather than a number manager. And if you don't become a people manager, you fail. And that's been the biggest change, that you have to learn to change your instinct to look at numbers first and people next, to people first and numbers next.
Very well put, Venkat. Who else? Yeah, I can see gentleman here. Please give him mic.
Good afternoon. I really enjoyed the interaction. My first walk into a Zudio was in Goa in Porvorim. Till then, I never walked in. And somewhere the confusion, it is brand connected with Zodiac. So are you hearing that often, that it's a brand connected with Zodiac? I'm also a loyal Westside customer. So Westside is top, right at the top, and Zudio's how many notches below? What is your positioning statement? Please answer that. Thank you.
We don't necessarily think of, for instance, do we think Zudio plays in the value space? Very much so. Do we think Westside plays in the value space? Very much so. They're just positioned differently in terms of what the customer can expect as the spectrum of choice that you get. They're both meant to be, quote unquote, real good fashion, real aspirational fashion at really interesting prices. Yet, they're positioned differently in what they offer, not necessarily by saying it's A versus B. And in many ways, if you look at Inditex, it's a good reference point to think about a global business that has worked for decades, running multiple brands, which are positioned differently from the customer standpoint, yet they're deeply integrated at the back. So what we do with Westside and Zudio and Star, and everything else that we do today with respect to the other brands that are there in the portfolio, is very intended to be very similar. Deeply differentiated at the front and deeply integrated at the back.
Gentleman behind Nagesh raised his hand. Yeah.
Yeah, Venkat, delight to hear your insights with such well-crafted questions by Shailesh. I have two questions. One is on a CFO hat question on Zudio, and second is on the product on Westside. The Zudio question first. Generally in conglomerates, the cost structures are not as nimble as, let's say, startup world is, right? And with Zudio, such tight gross margins, how are you basically managing your fixed costs and the operating leverage kick in to really churn the money out there? That's the first question. And second is on the Westside side, In the world of fashion and apparel, getting designs right is really difficult time and again. So how is this whole magic of your products, your sell-throughs coming in, freshness coming in, is really ticking right again and again? Because honestly, many brands struggle for that, right? And because it's a subjective world of fashion, I'm amazed by the consistency Westside is delivering.
I'm seeing the watch, so this will be the last question. Sorry, because I know a lot of you are interested, but the clock is ticking. We have just 10 seconds more to go. We need to have respect for the time schedule. So Venkat, we'll keep that as the last question.
That was, Shailesh, thank you. That was more for me than for the audience, I presume. The one on Zudio, I think it is relevant for the whole of the retail business would be my argument. If we are not efficient, somebody else who would be efficient and take your legs off. If 20 people try, there are only 2 that need to win to take your legs off. So I don't think so we have a choice. And efficiency should be ingrained again into the culture so that we choose to be efficient, not because we are forced to be efficient. The second part on Westside is, if we talk about mistakes, I think one of you talked about mistakes. The reality is we make ton loads of mistakes in product, in what we land up as fashion. But the good thing about the business that we are in, and I hope Shailesh would agree with me for a change, the reality is the customer votes with their money. And all you're seeking to do is learn from those votes and say, okay, fine, we got it wrong, madam. So hopefully I've given some half-decent answers to the questions. They're very interesting questions that have been posed. I would really thank Shailesh for being so nice a host and peppering me with questions. Unfortunately, I didn't get a choice to grill you, Shailesh, but that's for another day then.
No, I'm really feeling enriched by a lot of insights that Venkat has generously, provided to us, and I think we are richer by, our experience with Venkat today. Thank you, Venkat, for your time and sharing your insights and about your organization, Trent, with us, and thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Shailesh. Thank you, everyone.